From the campus of St. Louis University in St. Louis, Missouri, HEC TV proudly presents St. Louis University's 7th Annual Safety Across High Consequence Industries Conference, where safety meets business.
Today we have Captain Al Madar, who is the Managing Director of Corporate and Safety American Airlines. And Captain Madar is presently Managing Director of the Corporate Safety for that airline, and in this role, he oversees American's safety management system and all operational safety programs. Captain Madar joined American Airlines in 1964 as a pilot in Chicago, excuse me, and since that time has served in various positions, including captain and the check airman, FAA designee of the Boeing 767 and 757 aircraft, captain on the Boeing 727. He's also served in a number of management positions, including chief pilot, manager flight operations, manager flight training and standards, director of crew security, and managing director of systems operations. In addition, and I think this is important, Captain Madar served as the airline industry's chair for the FAA SMS Aviation Rulemaking Committee. Prior to joining American Airlines, Captain Madar spent 21 years in the Air Force Reserves and the Air National Guard, and he flew fast and probably frequently in F-100s, F-105s, F-4s, and F-16s. He's also served as a pilot and an attorney for the Banff Airlines from 1976 to 1984. A native of Dearborn, Michigan, a graduate of Oakland University, and holds the Juris Doctorate from the University of Detroit. Please welcome Captain Al Madar.
Good morning, everybody. I'm old, but I'm not quite that old. 1964 was probably about 20 years off. I joined American Airlines in 1984. So I think there's something to be said for longevity, but that much is probably a little bit too much. So again, I want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank Dr. Patankar. I want to thank Professor Terry Kelly for the invitation to be here. I've been impressed by the similarities in how we manage safety across the various different industries and high consequence industries, certainly. I've always wondered about that. I've been impressed that we do it in very similar ways, and certainly safety management and the safety management system is one way to do it. I was asked today to talk about safety leadership. I'll give you my thoughts about it. I don't think I have the only way to do it, but certainly one way, and some of the things I've learned the hard way, sort of the knocks of trying to get things done within a large corporation. So you can tell I'm a pilot. I like pictures. I've had the opportunity to fly jet airplanes for over 40 years. I still get to fly the 757 and 767. I have never met an airplane that I didn't like. It is a great profession and certainly a lot of fun. And I've also been very fortunate to do a lot of other things to complement the flying. So with that, let me see if I can navigate through this. Let me start out. I'm going to give you an overview of American Airlines and our safety leadership there. I'd like to talk about creating a leadership plan and a vision, also how you go about developing a safety management system and take a lot of safety programs and really put them together into a system that works and creates value within the corporation. I'd also like to spend a few minutes talking about culture, and certainly something we partnered with St. Louis University in understanding our culture, how to drive better performance through improvements in our safety culture, and the importance of a just culture, and something we've been pioneering really at American Airlines to improve how we drive accountability into the organization, which I think is very important. I'd also like to talk about fatigue risk management. It's an area where I think the FAA is leading in, really driven by the Colgan accident, and also by Congress getting very involved after that accident to say we've got to do something better when it comes to the area of fatigue and how we manage that. And then some final comments, and certainly happy to answer any questions that you may have. Just an overview of American Airlines. We're one of the mega carriers. We used to be the largest carrier in the world until a couple years ago. And then there were a number of mergers. As you probably know, Delta merged with Northwest, United merged with Continental, and created the two largest carriers. But still, American is very large, and I think you can see from the numbers here, there's a lot of metal that's moving every day, a lot of people that's moving, a lot of fuel that's being burned. And if you do the math, it talks about how much fuel every day. That comes out to just under 3 billion gallons of fuel a year. So when we talk about green initiatives and the importance of that, certainly we're putting out a lot of emissions into the air, and certainly something we're aware of at American Airlines in trying to reduce those emissions and look at some green alternatives. And you might be interested, the military is really leading that effort as alternate fuels that can be used in jet engines, which is, I think, very promising as we go forward. A lot of maintenance going on there, and one of the things I do in my position, not only do I have the operational safety oversight, but I also have the oversight of the maintenance organization. So I found that very interesting over time. That sort of gives you a picture worldwide of how big American Airlines is in relation. You see United, Delta, Lufthansa Group is the next biggest, and then followed by American. I wouldn't be surprised if there's more industry consolidation as we go forward. And as you probably know, American's right now going through reorganization in the bankruptcy process. We are the last carrier to do that. It seems like every other carrier has done it. Delta, Northwest, United, US Air, Continental. You know, I think it's something that's just telling of any industry these days that, you know, over time, as the world becomes more flat, as Friedman writes about in his, I think, very good book, you have to compete in the world. And I think that sort of thing is driven a lot more competition. You have to look worldwide to say, how do we compete? And one of the things we found that we simply can't with our business model without doing some reorganization. So we're certainly going about that process now. And it's a very exciting opportunity. I think with everything like that, that seems to be a negative, you can look and find opportunity. And certainly one of them I found is that whenever you're trying to drive change into an organization, whenever you're trying to create some new culture, you look for teaching opportunities. When people, you have their attention. And certainly one teaching opportunity I found is a lot of people are looking for leadership as you go into a reorganization. And it's certainly one of those opportunities to teach people a new way of going about their business and a way to create additional value, especially when it comes to safety. That's American's global network where we're positioned with our One World Alliance partners. Again, it goes to the fact that this is a global industry, and one of the ways you leverage, you know, your size is by combining with other carriers worldwide. So we have an antitrust relationship, antitrust immunity relationship with British Airways, Iberia, Japan Airlines, so we can operate somewhat seamlessly in the service we offer and the product we put out in the marketplace. And again, one of those changes going about in the industry. One of the things I think that's very exciting for American Airlines, we have the largest airplane order in the world that's on the books, and most of that has already been financed through the manufacturers. So as you can see there, there's 556 new airplanes that are on firm order and another 523 options between Airbus and Boeing. So that's a very exciting future ahead of us. And what that means is over the next 5 years, American will, if you look at the age of the fleet across some of the majors, American in the next 5 years will have the youngest fleet of aircraft, and more importantly, the most fuel efficient fleet of aircraft. So as the price of fuel goes up, which it seems to be on an unending course of going in that direction, certainly fuel efficient airplanes are the key. One thing about pilots, since there's a number of pilots, a few pilots I know in the room from the aviation side, we have 7,800 pilots, and that means a lot of training. Every one of those pilots goes through a week of training almost every 9 months, where they come in and go through recurrent training, simulator checks. They also get line checks every month, every 9 months. So a lot of training and checking going on to make sure that everybody is at the very highest standards when they're out there flying. As far as safety leadership, the federal aviation regulations require that an airline, a Part 121 airline, which is air carrier operations, carrying passengers, operate at the highest degree of safety, is really what the standard is. And you know, I'm not sure I could define that other than to say it's about as high as you can imagine. And it's, to do that, they require that the airline have 5 positions that are manned. They detail what the requirements are for those positions. One of them is the Director of Safety, which is a position I've held for the last 5 years. Prior to that, I was in the Director of Operations role, running our Systems Operations Control, which manages the airline 24/7 worldwide. That operation has somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 people, dispatchers, load planners, flight planners. So it's a very intense operation, but it's a very exciting one too, because you can imagine there's always something going on day in and day out, and sometimes, as you've probably seen in the last week or so, those situations make the news and have to be handled. So, creating a safety leadership plan. I think it comes down to people and also processes. And when it comes to people, I think you know, you have to really take an inventory of the people in your organization, the people you're going to be dealing with. I think you have to develop and champion a safety management plan. And I won't belabor that too much because we've spoken a lot in the last day about safety management and how that's done. But I will mention a few things as we go through it. As you get started, you take an inventory and you look at your people, and one of the things that I look for, and I think it's been mentioned already, are real smart and real nice people. I want people that can run and play with the other boys and girls out there and get along. And I would take that over a real smart person any day, because I've seen very smart people who can be very caustic in the organization because of the way they interact with people. So it's the people that can team with other people that I think are very important and that you want in your organization as a leader. Programs, you want to make sure your programs are effective. If you call a meeting and nobody shows up, it's probably because the meetings you have or the process you've implemented are not creating value in the organization. So I think you have to be honest with yourself and say, what are we doing in the organization that provides value? And if you're not providing value, the business model simply is not going to support that going forward. I know when I took over the Systems Operations Control, I think the second or third day I was there, I got a note from a dispatcher, and he said, Captain Madar, I think you're probably a very nice guy, but we haven't had anybody leading this organization for a month since the previous guy left, and frankly, I'm not sure why we need you. So I thought that was kind of an interesting challenge, and I was up on the 3rd floor, and I went down to the floor and I sat down with him, you know, along with a number of other dispatchers at the desk, and I said, you know, you make a fair point. I'll tell you what, in the next 6 months, if you don't think I provide value, send me another email, and I promise you I will leave. So I was happy at the end, 3 years later, I was able to put out a note to the SOC and say that this person had never asked me to leave, and in fact was agreed that we had done a lot of things that created a lot of value along the way. So again, it comes down to value in the organization and the fact that you have to do it to make sure that you are actually moving the dial forward. Okay, and finally, culture, good and the bad. You need to understand what it is. You know, there's going to be some ugly parts, the good, bad, and the ugly. You need to know what those are, go after them, and identify them, create strategies to improve them. And certainly that's something we've been working with St. Louis University to help us understand and do better going forward. And finally, execute it. Jump in and get started. I think too many people wait to try to get something perfect, and it never quite gets there, and they don't quite get started. So when you come up with some good ideas, get some people together, jump in, start doing it. There's going to be angst. People don't like change. There's going to be mistakes. But you just have to start, and then it goes into continuous improvement. You will be doing that forever, continuous improvement. So you might as well start and get at it. I think you have to start with a leadership vision. Mine was driven in many respects by the fact that I had spent quite a bit of time in operations before I came to safety. And what I saw before I came to safety was that it was a very siloed organization. When I dealt with them from an operational perspective, I wasn't sure that they were really providing much value as far as helping me with my business. So when I came into the safety organization, one of the things I said out there as far as the tone is that you really need to partner with those production folks, the people out there on the front line, and they're the ones, again, that have to see that you're providing value. You have to team with them. And I think it's very important that you understand who the subject matter expert is, the SME, because in many cases it's not you. If you happen to have lots of years as a pilot, or you happen to do whatever, and you have that sort of technical experience, that's good. But if you don't, and you have really the safety background, you have to recognize that what you're doing is really melding in with the production person and helping them do their business better. If you slow them down, if you do things that they don't understand or don't create value, I think you won't accomplish anything. So this is really the leadership vision that I started with. It doesn't mean that you don't work together as a team to understand what you want to do going forward as a team, but I think as a leader, you have to have a clear vision in your mind on where you want to take that organization and how you want to do it. So the plan, I'm not going to beat this to death. Obviously, safety management system. It starts at the top with the leadership, and certainly in American Airlines, that's our chief executive officer. So just a couple things. I'm going to go ahead. We've got a safety policy out there which sets the tones, and this is a video from our CEO who took over December 1st last year. And one of the first things he did was create this video. I sat down and spoke with him, spent some time explaining his role in the safety as far as safety goes within the corporation. So if you could play that.
Nothing that we do here at American is more vital and more important than ensuring the safety of our colleagues and our customers. Indeed, it is our most important responsibility as an airline. American Safety Management System, or SMS, which is a formalized process for managing risk, is the key tool that we use to ensure the safety of all of our operations. Its success, however, requires the commitment of each one of you to promote and foster a positive safety culture, one that encourages the reporting of mistakes and potential hazards, and learning from those reports in order to prevent future injuries or accidents. No one has more knowledge of the potential hazards within our operations, and no one is in a better position to prevent them than you. This is why commitment to your role within SMS and the dedication to the principles set forth in our safety policy is essential. That means continually maintaining compliance with all regulatory requirements, industry standards, and the laws of the many countries where we operate. In addition, it is also each employee's responsibility to report errors, violations, and any and all safety concerns as quickly as possible to one of our voluntary reporting programs, such as ASAP. You can find additional information about American safety policy and our SMS through JetNet on the Safety, Security, and Environment website. Together we can and will promote a positive safety culture and prevent injuries and accidents in the workplace. Thank you for your continued commitment and dedication towards meeting this goal.
Okay, that video lives on our intranet site that every employee has access to. We call it JetNet. The video itself, the first time I saw a video like that was Continental Airlines and their CEO doing that, Jeff Smizek, who's now over at United Airlines. So again, benchmarking is very important. Moving on a little bit, I don't want to spend too much time here because I think we probably spend a lot of time and most people here understand it. What I will say is, again, the pilot perspective, I like to keep things somewhat simple. And if you look at safety assurance and how it generally works, it always comes down to the same thing. You have an operating system, whatever that may be. It may be the medical field, aviation, whatever. You collect and analyze data, you do a system assessment, you find out whether the risk there is acceptable. If it is, you just continue to monitor the system. If not, you take some corrective action, and once that's acceptable, you put it back in the operating system to make sure that it's going to work as you thought and actually be effective. Come over to safety risk management, and that's really system design. It's about change management. I think if there was probably the biggest challenge I think I faced at American Airlines, and I see this in most organizations, is the management of change and safety risk management. I think people inherently, when you're put into a position, they believe they have the expertise to go ahead and make changes and do so safely. I think what you find out is in many cases, there's unintended consequences that they simply have not anticipated, and they haven't set up a safety assurance process ahead of time when they implement that change to look for those unintended consequences. So if I were to put a new flight procedure in, first I would do a safety risk assessment to understand in a very formalized and structured way what I think those hazards are and have I done that correctly. And I'll just give you an example, one thing we were dealing with last night. We had a crew layover in La Paz, Bolivia. Now La Paz is at 13,200 feet. That is a very high altitude, and the first time I landed there and got out to walk around, I think I went about 10 steps and I thought, I'm not sure I'm going to make it to operations 50 feet away. When I finally did get there, I found a guy standing there smoking a Camel cigarette, and I thought, this is unbelievable. But it takes some time to acclimate at a very high altitude. In fact, the FAA requires that you wear oxygen once you're above 14, and really above 10,000 feet is where you should be doing it. So laying over in La Paz, which we had to do because a plane broke, became something that the crew was very unhappy about. They thought they were being held in a very unfriendly environment, which they were, and until that plane was fixed and they could fly it out of there. What we are now doing, though, the question became, what do we do going forward? Because the pilot put in a very, I think the title of his safety debrief was being held hostage in La Paz, to be frank. He was not a happy camper, and neither was his co-pilot. And so what we're going to do, along with the medical department, is conduct a safety risk assessment. We're going to go in there and look to say, are there some mitigating things that we can do to address the hazards? The hazards can be identified by the medical department. You know, obviously at a high altitude, maybe you need some supplemental oxygen at the hotel. You shouldn't, from a guidance standpoint, be doing a lot of exercise, you know, for a while until you become acclimated, which certainly you can do, as evidenced by the guy smoking the Camel cigarette who lived there. So we're going to do that safety risk assessment, make sure we have the right mitigating actions in place to reduce that hazard to an acceptable level. So the next time we do it, we will be ready to support that crew there, and it won't be something that, oh, what do we do now? You know, the crew is complaining they can't breathe very well. So I think it's a very important process to manage change. And one thing you might do, when it's something it's hard to monitor. For example, the first time we would get to monitor this would be the next time a crew's there. And if we didn't get it right, I'm sure we're going to hear about it. So what we might do is kind of test it in that alternate universe where we go over and we actually send someone in to test it even ahead of time to see if that particular change is going to work right before we actually put it in the operating environment. So again, I think this is very, very, very important. It's something that's very tough because people have to stop what they do every day and go, okay, I'm going to have to manage this change that I want to implement in a very formalized way. But I think it pays big dividends, and I can give you case after case of that. So what I've been very happy with is what I'm starting to see is in our culture is that when people go to change something, the first thing somebody says is, well, did you conduct a safety risk assessment? And they want to see it. Or they want to understand, was there one done before we go change it again? Because sometimes, if you stick around long enough in an organization, what you see is something that happened you did 20 years ago. 20 years later, somebody goes, why don't we change that? And if you happen to be the person that was there 20 years ago, you go, well, guess what? It used to be that way, and we changed it because this is what's wrong with it. And if you don't have that sort of cultural knowledge, you'll end up going around in circles, changing it again, and learning the same lessons over and over again, or making the same mistakes over and over again. So system design, again, I think we're all familiar with this probably. You just want to go ahead, identify hazards, do a risk assessment. If everything looks good, as far as the risk, you want to go ahead and put it in the operating environment and monitor it for any unintended consequences. If not, you want to put some risk controls in place, and then you want to go analyze it again to see if there's any substitute risk or any unintended consequences that you may have introduced into that system with these additional changes that you put in as far as risk controls. And again, once you're happy, you put it all together, and that's the two systems, which are very synergistic in how they work with each other. So here at American Airlines, what we did, if you go back through the various operational departments, and safety management system by regulation only applies to the operational areas of an aviation organization. So it's about aviation safety, it's not employee safety. I'm not saying that the principles don't apply when you're managing employee safety, but from a regulatory perspective, it's very focused on aviation safety in operational departments. And so you start looking at those operational areas, and the first one is really the flight operation. And if you look back in 2007, we had some programs. We had an ASAP program, which again started many years ago. I think it was mentioned we really led the industry there in implementing that. And we had a FOQA program, the flight data analysis, where we take the FDR, the flight data recorders, and download that data. So we had a number of programs that are operating independently. What we decided to do is start pulling these into a process, and we called it Safe Ops. And Safe Ops evolved over time with more and more data feeding in. It's really a management review and have the safety assurance systems that are out there to say what's going on and how does that all come together, and so we understand it. And that management review, the way it works at American is down at the bottom, all this data is coming in. We have working groups that meet monthly. Those working groups, I can tell you, provide a lot of value. They're very well attended, upwards of 30 or 40 people, and they can last all day long, looking at all the data and looking for risk that we can then say, here's how we're going to prioritize our assets to go address that. And as that risk goes higher, or you see chronic risk, it goes up higher in that review process, so that the next review is at the board level, and at the board level, it's at the managing director level, which is my level, so that tougher problems, higher risk, can be addressed with the resources that really can only be, divvied out, so to speak, by that level of management. And then it goes on up to the vice president level and on up to senior management on a quarterly basis or as needed. So you move over to the next area, maintenance and engineering. This is one of those examples of where quality and safety meet. And there's a program in the airlines called the CAS, Continuing Analysis and Surveillance System, which is mandated by regulation. It's really a quality program that looks to measure your compliance and the effectiveness of both your maintenance program and your inspection program, both of which are mandated and very detailed in how you go about doing both of those. So that's a quality program. But as you go into SMS, one of the things we were interested in the Aviation Rulemaking Committee is taking credit for some of these quality processes, which we had spent a lot of money on. There are 40 people that are in that CAS group, 30 auditors, 10 analysts, that are constantly looking at these data sources. And to turn it into truly a safety assurance process, what we did over time is we added more and more data feeds, and you can see all these bubbles. Each one of them is a data feed. But we prioritized within that process safety, compliance, and quality, so that obviously we were addressing safety risk at the highest level. We were ensuring we were compliant with all the regulations, and obviously we want to make sure we have a quality product out there when it comes to that aircraft and when it's ready to fly, that it's airworthy. So you put all those processes in one, and you in your SMS, you're dealing, as I think has been mentioned a number of times, with quality, compliance, and safety. And again, you create another management review leg there, which is the CAS process off on the right. Mimics the other one, Safe Ops, looks very similar in how it works. And again, it's that symmetry, that simplicity, I think, that helps everybody understand it in the organization. On the cabin side, not quite as many risks or as many data points. Certainly something we need to pay attention to when they have the same processes there. Finally, on the ground side, the people who load the airplane, the cargo loaders, aircraft damage, that sort of thing. I can tell you, you can see, if you look out the window of a terminal, you'll see lots of moving parts, lots of trucks moving around, belt loaders. They don't always stop exactly when they should, and sometimes they bump into the airplane. And aircraft damage is a very big cost item. It's something we pay a lot of attention to at the airline. And again, a lot of data feeds here. And finally, you have the final leg of that whole management review process. And also, we've now added an integrated review board that meets quarterly, that crosses all the different areas and brings all those leaders together to talk about common risks. We also have people on each one of these groups that cross all those groups so that they're seeing the various risks. So somebody from the CAS organization will sit in on safe ops and so on and so forth. So to make sure we're totally integrated. So let me get over to safety culture, and I think this is very important, and talk a little bit about accountability. I think one of the things that you will see if you look into the SMS regulatory guidance out there is that an organization should define very clearly that line that separates acceptable from unacceptable behavior. And too often, I think in the past, we've kind of gone to two different camps. And let me scoot forward to this slide, because I think it's important that you don't have a culture that is blameless or one that is punitive. Certainly, if you have a punitive culture, we all know that that drives a lot of data underground. If you have a blameless culture, then people simply don't hold each other accountable, and that's not good from a safety perspective either. And I'll give you an example of what can happen in a punitive culture that's a personal experience. When I was in the Air Force, when I first started out flying F-100s, we would go out there and we'd get into these dogfighting maneuvers. And when you do that, you put so many G-forces on an airplane. So if we're standing here right now, we're at 1 G, 1 gravitational force field. 2 Gs, you start to feel a lot more pressure, you weigh twice as much. So we would pull upwards of 6 or 7 Gs, and in fact, the F-16 can pull up to 9 Gs. So now, for example, me, I weigh almost 1,800 pounds, which is a lot of stress on your body, but it's also a lot of stress on an airplane. And at a certain point, that airplane will start to break. And we call that an over-G condition, which requires an inspection if you over-G the airplane. Well, years ago, they didn't have recorders that recorded the Gs. They simply had a little G meter, and it would record it, but when you got done, you could just simply hit a button to reset it to 0, so you started over again. Well, when we'd come back, we would diligently, in the heat of battle, we might over-G an airplane, we'd write it up, and it would be inspected. The commander, who has to allocate more maintenance resources to that, came out and said, the next pilot who over-Gs an airplane isn't going to be grounded for 30 days. Well, you can imagine what happened. We just come back and punch the G meter off. Nobody wants to sit on the ground, but nobody intentionally goes out to over-G an airplane either. It's not, when I'm in the middle of a dogfight, I'm watching the other airplane. I'm not watching the G meter that was that big, literally, down on the instrument panel. So you can imagine what happened. The next step of that, it didn't happen in our squadron, but in another squadron, a wing came off one of those airplanes when they were out there in a dogfight, and the pilot was killed. Now, I don't know if their commander in that unit had the same policy, but I can tell you, that is certainly, it's that sort of atmosphere that can permeate an organization that can lead to very dangerous consequences. So the punitive part is, the culture is not where you want to be. Again, on the other side, though, you don't want to be blameless. If I don't hold you accountable or hold myself accountable, then at some point, we're all going to basically do whatever we want. And I'm just going to say, hey, I didn't mean to do it, sorry, and go on. And that's simply not how you can make an organization perform at a very high level. So the key is to have a system that best supports a safety culture, and that's one that draws the line in the right place. We've done a lot of work in this area, and one of the things we've been doing in our ASAP program for about 3 years is testing the concept of just culture And we've been using a consultant that has helped us define this, and we've been teaching every person that sits in our event review team in that ASAP, with those ASAP reports and looks at those. We have the FA, we have a union representative and the company representative. All of them get trained in these concepts. And basically what it comes down to is you use, besides the training, you have some algorithm tools that you use to understand behavior. And it comes down to human error, at-risk behavior, and reckless behavior. Because if I were not to give you some definitions, some training, your idea of what is reckless, what crosses that line, could be completely different than me. Somebody says, I think it's just a mistake, you shouldn't do anything about it. Somebody else says, I think you ought to fire them. And you see that all the time. And we've managed over the last 3 years to convince the FA that this is a better process. They've allowed us, after running a pilot program for a year, where they've taken some researchers from the University of New Mexico who joined our ASAP teams to watch how we did the training and to watch how we interacted with each other as an event review team. They've allowed us to continue doing this and said we think it's a very good practice and a better way to understand behavior. Because once you understand behavior, then it tells you what you should do about it. And it comes down to this. If you decide that it's a human error, you need to look at your system and understand what is going on in your system, what controls failed that allowed that mistake to happen. If you decide it's at-risk behavior, and I heard that term referred to earlier, at-risk behavior is simply when somebody's cutting the corner. I'm talking on a cell phone, driving down the road. It works for me day in and day out until one day I have an accident. And I wonder, geez, how did that happen? You know, well, obviously I've been cutting the corner for a long time. It always worked, but it didn't that one day. And your data should be picking up on that and telling you what's happening in the organization is you're getting that drift that you now need to correct. And so you go ahead and when you see this, there's coaching and counseling that goes on with the employee. You also look at your organization and say, what sort of incentives do I have out there that allow people to engage in this sort of behavior? It may be simply that management walks around, and today I walk right by a guy who doesn't have fall protection on. Tomorrow the guy falls off an airplane and I go, geez, we ought to fire that guy, you know, because he wasn't doing what he was supposed to. Well, the day before I allowed him to do it. So it can very much be the incentives I've allowed to be out there, which is today it works for me because you cut a corner, you don't have to take the time to get the fall protection, and I get the airplane out on time. Tomorrow it's, hey, you just hurt yourself or you damaged an airplane, so I don't like that, and today you're fired. So you have to be consistent in how you address behavior, and it's that fairness that drives people to understand that they can report and do so and be treated in a fair and equitable way. And then finally, there's reckless behavior. And as an organization, you have to draw those lines in the sand that say, when you cross that line, the only way that that behavior is going to be addressed is with some sort of punitive action. And it doesn't mean you have to fire the guy. You can simply, it may be where you sit down and you have a documented discussion to begin with. It may be you put them on an advisory, but punitive action is definitely one way that something you have to use from time to time to hold the standards to where they need to be. We did a lot of data analysis both before and after Just Culture. This is just one slide. We have 4 different ASAP programs in dispatch, flight service, the flight attendants, the pilots have one, and also maintenance engineering. This one happens to just be looking at it on the pilot side, and actually this is the maintenance slide. And it shows that we saw a lot of benefits from it. There were more reports, more program changes, there were more re-education, so on and so forth. So a lot of these data points helped us convince the FAA this is a better way to do business. We've taken it to another step, and we call it now the American Airlines Just Policy. On the maintenance side, it's called for maintenance errors and violations, so that it's not just within our aviation safety action program, but it's within everything that's going on. We apply that Just Policy. And again, going to the benchmarking, the leader in this field, if you look around, is really Qantas Airlines. They're probably 4 years ahead of American when it comes to this sort of application of Just Culture to their whole operation and how they do business. So they've been very helpful, and they're one of our partners in oneworld. So we collaborate a lot and discuss how we can do things better. So, in the latest, if you know, follow safety on the aviation side, the Flight Safety Foundation, it's a worldwide organization that manages safety. Their magazine, which is Aerospace World, 40,000 downloads, 5,000 copies produced monthly. They featured our Just Policy here in a recent edition. Number of benefits, which I've already talked about really with Just Culture. I would encourage you to go look at how you look at behavior in your organizations, because it's a key factor in, I think, driving safety improvements. Finally, let me talk about fatigue management. And I think this is another area where the Colgan accident drove Congress to action, and in many cases, sometimes the regulator is helpful in helping move an organization along, in the sense that I think we all know fatigue is a very serious factor when it comes to safety. But how many of you are actively managing fatigue in your organizations? And after the Colgan accident, if you remember that accident, the commuter aircraft up in Boston that crashed, that pilot and the co-pilot, I think, had been up almost 24 hours. They had commuted from, you know, I think the co-pilot came from San Francisco all the way over to the East Coast, had maybe gotten an hour of sleep, and then continued on and flown, and obviously fatigue was a factor. So Congress mandated that we go out and we create a fatigue risk management plan and ultimately a fatigue risk management system. And what we did at American is what we always try to do. We'll look at a regulation like that and we'll say, is there value there? And if there is, certainly we'll go ahead and not only implement it, but we'll do it the very best we can, is what I always try to tag on to such a regulatory requirement. If it doesn't have much value, we'll simply comply with it and move on. You know, and so I think it's obviously very important that regulators, as they go forward, are always looking again for creating regulations that provide an organization with value. And I have to compliment the FAA and their rulemaking committee on SMS, because they were very in tune with trying to come up with an SMS regulation that provided value. So let me mention fatigue risk management a little bit more. Obviously, it's about performance. It's not about just simply being tired. I mean, if you're in the back of an airplane and you're tired, you can imagine the pilot in the front's tired. I know you probably don't want to think about that, and I know when I go in, you know, I had some surgery a few years back, and one of the things I thought about is I hope the physician isn't tired, so I want to be in at the right time of day, not at the end of the day, and not too early, because I don't know if they're a morning person or not. But fatigue is a big deal, and you look at the performance and how you can influence their performance and do it in a very scientific way, because there's a lot of science out there now that you can help you manage this using a lot of objective measures and subjective measures. What we did is we looked out there and said, who manages fatigue the very best in the world? Believe it or not, it was a company called EasyJet, which has a couple of 100 aircraft and operate over in Europe in a number of areas. And for some reason, they had decided about 6-7 years ago, they had an incident where a pilot was fatigued and almost caused an accident. And they went out and got very serious about fatigue risk management, to the point where the FAA had a symposium about fatigue about 4 years ago, and it was kicked off by the administrator of the FAA. Hundreds of people were there, and the featured speaker at that symposium was EasyJet. So when fatigue management came around, we went over to EasyJet, looked at their system, and after we left, we had posted a job opportunity out there at American to manage our system, and we were lucky that their manager of fatigue applied for the position, and we now have been able to bring her on board at American Airlines, which has helped us in a big way as far as moving forward very quickly with our FRMS, our fatigue risk management system. Let me just briefly show you this. And it seems complicated, but it's really not. It's simply at the very top there, you have fatigue reports that come in. We have, on average, 70 pilots every month that call in fatigued, either during their trip or prior to their trip. They call in and simply say, I'm too fatigued to fly. And the quid pro quo for that, for not taking any sort of action against that pilot, is that they have to submit a very detailed fatigue report, which then comes in and is analyzed in great detail, run through some scientific models. There's a safety fast model that we use almost exclusively. We run it through those objective measures. We do a lot of subjective analysis. We look at the schedule factors, we look at individual factors and workload factors, which you see along the left there in blue. And the outputs from that is you either find out that it's individually driven, it's something that's driven by the system. Maybe it was a layover hotel where they're doing construction. Maybe it's a thunderstorm that stopped the operation for a few hours and lengthened the day. Or it's some other factor that's beyond our control, which would really be something like the thunderstorm that I just referred to. Those are the outputs from the system. This, again, looks complicated. It isn't. But you take the individual and the system factors and you divide it into two areas. So everything in the blue is really on the left side of the slide is if it's a system. And what we have there on the bottom of that slide is the fatigue review committee, where you bring all the correct operational departments, crew schedule, network planning, safety, the unions there, flight departments there. Everybody comes that has a dog in this show, so to speak, and you look at it to understand what the data is telling us and what we can do differently. For example, we had a trip that went from Miami to Bogota. It left in the middle of the night, and it went to Bogota, and because it was the aircraft that was being operated couldn't carry that much fuel and a full payload, it would get there many times, only hold for 15 or 20 minutes and have to divert. Once that plane diverted, it would go over to Guayaquil or somewhere like that. By the time it got back to Bogota, they had already been flying 6 hours, and they were into a 10-hour day, and to continue on back to Miami would have meant a 12-hour, 13-hour day for 2 pilots. So you can imagine if you started out at midnight and went and did something like that, you'd be extremely tired when you got back. So we received a fatigue report about it. It was on our radar screen. We were trying to figure out a way to address it, and the same crew flew it again. They'd given us a warning the first time. The second time, they simply went fatigued in Bogota, which you can imagine, the schedule disruption, the passengers that are stranded, and so on and so forth. But we ended up putting a different airplane on. We augmented the crew, put an additional pilot on, so that one pilot can go back and rest while there's still 2 pilots in the front. So again, you want to be proactive in addressing these things so that you do have pilots at the front of that airplane that are rested, that are flying you around. Just like I want to have a physician that's rested when I have an operation. So, a couple final comments. And starting first with data protection. Dr. Patankar showed me that the medical community is way ahead, it looks like, when it comes to data protection from the aviation community. We protect voluntary safety data, but it is certainly discoverable in some sort of a legal process, and that's not a good thing. But the other side of that is, if you worry about that, you'll never go produce the data and address the safety concerns, and you'll still end up in court someday because you didn't do it right. So I always tell our legal people, you know, we simply can't worry about the legal process. We simply need to do what's right from a safety perspective and let the cards fall as they may. But the more data protection you can have as an industry, the better, because again, I think it encourages the reporting and the openness of what goes on. Vendor oversight, I've heard that mentioned. I was very interested in what was said about in the nuclear field and the safety oversight they had of vendors and how much vendors do what they do a lot of the work for the Department of Energy. The model that is out there in maintenance now in the aviation community is a lot of maintenance will be done, will be outsourced. And American was the last carrier, and we finally have had to give it up because of, again, the competitive model. We did 95% of all our maintenance in-house, huge maintenance organization. But as we go through reorganization, we're now going to start outsourcing. And one of the challenges is when you outsource is it's done all over the world. A lot of companies, you go over to China, you go over to Singapore, you'll see United, Continental, American will start showing up there. But some of the challenges, I know I heard it mentioned about language barriers. Certainly when you're flying, you know, people talk about, you know, everybody's supposed to speak English, but if they're not speaking to you, they're speaking in their native tongue, usually to somebody else. So you don't have a clue from a situational awareness perspective what's going on until they talk to you. And when they talk to you, in many cases, the only English they know are set phrases. I was down in Ecuador one time getting ready to take off in Quito, and I needed to, as I pulled onto the runway, it was cleared for takeoff, I needed to pull off the runway because of a problem, and I tried to communicate that to the tower, and all they could say was cleared for takeoff, because that I was in the spot on the, as far as my sequencing for takeoff to be cleared. They didn't understand, no, American Airlines needs to taxi down to the end and pull off for a minute. So it's a challenge. And on the maintenance side, as we go over to China, for example, we have thousands of work cards that have to be performed on an aircraft as we overhaul it. Each work card is a task. Those cards are produced by our engineering department, some 350 engineers, and those are all in English. You take it to China, all those cards are translated by the contractor into Chinese. And the Chinese card is the first card, and behind it is the English card that's stapled to it. They're working to the English card, but you have to have that oversight to make sure that in the translation they didn't miss something. So you have to have a very aggressive vendor oversight at these operations. Certainly language is a challenge. Don't confuse who the subject matter expert is. Again, I mentioned that earlier. Just recognize and respect the fact that it's about production. It's about the producing value at the bottom line, and that's what makes the business work. And the people out there doing that every day are really the subject matter experts. If you're not partnering with them and providing value, you are not going to be accomplishing your safety objectives at the end of the day. Recognize safety's role is just that, to be champions of safety, facilitators, and independent evaluators at the end. That is the other part that is very, very important, because that independence allows you at the end of the day to call it the way it is. The data says this, I don't care what you say, we respect your view, but we need to call that the way it is, and it needs to be addressed in a very honest and forthright way, and I think that may go to the ethics part that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. The next thing is obsess over failures and learn as an organization. Too often, I think what can happen is you can simply say, okay, we understand what it is, and you move on. You need to obsess on, well, okay, we understand it, but why did it happen? And I think that was mentioned in an earlier presentation. So that sort of obsessive compulsiveness about failure, I think, is very, very important. The people and process accountability, I've talked about that with Just Culture. Assign risk to everything. Every corporation has scarce resources. If you're not assigning risk to it, you can't prioritize it correctly. When I walk in there for a budget meeting and I'm asking for additional headcount, I'm going to have to justify that headcount just like any other business process owner. And the fact that I simply say safety doesn't mean anything. Where's your data? What's it going to produce? How, as far as the bottom line, what are the benefits, the costs? So very, very critical, and I think you have to recognize that as a safety advocate. Continuously improve. That's what it's all about. That's what we're doing here today. I think a big way to do that is that you always need to be on the lookout for innovations. Benchmarking is very important, as I've mentioned. If I come to a conference like this and I pick up one idea that I can take back into the organization, that helps move the organization forward. So one of the things I was at recently we started doing, and I didn't bring it along today, is we started doing bow tie modeling. I was at a conference and I saw that demonstrated. If you're not familiar with it, it's simply a way to visualize and communicate risk, where you can show in a bow tie, on the one side you picture a bow tie, in the middle you have an unintended consequence or an undesired event, let's say. On the left side you have all the proactive controls you have in place to prevent from getting to the middle. But if you do get to the middle, what you have on the right side then are a number of reactive controls that hopefully prevent at the very far side an aircraft accident or some very catastrophic event. And by doing this sort of diagramming, it really helps people in the organization understand what's going on, visualize it, communicate it to other people. I know at Qantas is where I really picked up on this again. I think you're probably reading the papers about a year or so ago, Qantas had their A380, the largest aircraft in the world. And if you haven't ridden on one, you should. I mean, it's like, it's incredibly big, let's put it that way. And if you think a 747 is big, you should get on an A380. But they had an engine failure coming out of Singapore. And that engine failure led to some other mechanical issues, and they barely got the aircraft back into Singapore safely. Did an incredible job actually flying it. So they grounded their entire fleet. I think they had 14 or so A380s. Incredible cost. But what it says a lot about the safety culture that they put that entire fleet of airplanes on the ground until they understood what was going on. And it turned out it was an engineering issue in the Rolls-Royce engines that were on that aircraft. But at the end of the day, how they proved the safety case before they put that airplane and that fleet back in the air was through bow tie modeling. And they had the regulator, they had Rolls-Royce, they had Airbus, and they had Qantas all in the room. And I've seen the bow tie model. There literally are hundreds of proactive controls. The undesired event in the middle is the engine failure. There are hundreds of controls reactively as far as what the pilots can do, what all the backup systems can do if there is that engine failure, that ultimately would stop a catastrophic event like a crash of that airplane. And by diagramming all that out and all the new controls they put in place, they were able to prove to themselves and prove to the board of directors that we can do this and do this very safely, and we're going to go ahead and reinstate that fleet and put it back in the air. So if you haven't gotten into bow tie modeling, I encourage you, it's just something you might want to consider. So with that, I want to thank you, and certainly happy to take any questions, but it's certainly been a privilege to talk to you today, and hope you come fly American Airlines.